Welcome to episode 13 of the Interstice Podcast. Whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple iTunes, or watching here on the channel, thank you very much for tuning in. For the questions that get answered in this episode, if you have one and you want it answered, you can write to me at davetrippin@gmail.com and it will likely appear here in the episode. Usual gig. Some free-form conversation that we'll have, and then in the second half move on to questions. So I put a post the other day onto my Instagram, and the idea behind it was a reflection I've had recently on kids. When I'd spoken the last podcast, it was that I see all these great kids at my school, and whether it's like an element of accumulated experience or the fact that all of my friends around me have children now at this point in my life, so many of them, a lot of them moving on to their second kid, their third kid, stuff, things of this nature, that it stands out to me. And I had this other kind of like revelation the other night. I was speaking to a good friend, and we were talking about how as you get older, obviously things are trailing off behind you, like the wake behind a ship. Those are your memories. And the further away that you get, those memories that you've created, which seem to be following so closely behind you, actually dissipate until you can't tell that they were ever there behind you at all. The wake disappears behind the ship. And how does this relate to kids? Well, I think it's always good to take stock of where you are in your life and why you're doing the things that you do as they relate to your history, because we are designed to not realize how much of that is fading away from us. And I think anybody who's listening to this, if you are watching this, if you really think back hard on the memories that you have, the older that you are, truly those in your further past are drifting away, are becoming forgotten. And you're given this kind of framework when you think back. There are things that stand out more than others, but it's kind of a loosely assembled tapestry, you come to realize, if you really spend some time reflecting on what it is that you recall. Because the other night, like I say, when I was speaking to my friend, wow, that's like, there's a lot that I simply don't remember. I mean, they come about when you're sitting with a friend sometimes, and your friend can remind you of experiences that you've forgotten. But I think ultimately what would surprise you most is how much is not there. And this matters to me because it seems to be that our past informs our future. Well, that's why we study history, is to make like an astute decision how we carry forward. Or we're not really any different than the goldfish that swims around to the other side of the bowl, and then everything is new again, and all your accumulated experience or whatever came before is meaningless because you're not able to use it as a point of reference or growth. And so I like to think about this in relation to kids, like, why have I arrived at this? And in the post that I made most recently on Instagram, there was a wealth of engagement from people, which I thought was really, really cool. And the vast majority of it also, I would say, not bitter, which is another accomplishment in itself, because I think for a lot of people, children can be a very bitter topic because it touches on things that are, well, they're tender spots, we'll say. They're trigger points for other people. I don't know what you want to call it, because they relate to a relationship, and they relate to us being with someone or alone. They relate to accomplishment. And these kind of sore spots, sensitive points in people's lives, matter to them because we're kind of quietly assessing ourselves and our successes as we've laid out to ourselves. And when kids and marriage can be a part of that, it's very easy to judge ourselves as having failed, or not performing up to what we thought we would, or meeting the sort of ideal that we had idealized so far in our lives. But what I saw is kind of like a resounding theme out of what everybody shared there. And I think that this is definitely more modern, I suppose you would say, is that it really doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing what matters to you. And that is inescapably a selfish thing. I think that's a important part of like being a balanced person, is accepting the behaviors that you have that are selfish, which are bad, and accepting when you can be selfish and it's not a bad thing. All selfishness is not made equal. And I think this sort of selfishness to want to experience our own life on our own terms is a healthy thing, where in the past you could argue that so much of marriage was dictated to us by necessity. A lot of people are getting married because that's simply exactly what you have to do. And where society has moved on to that, we still have that same mentality of necessity when it no longer really exists. And so it's a needless pressure and it's a needless anxiety that gets put on all of us. And I suppose it's for me as well, it's come about for that very reason. When I came over to Japan, a girl that I still love deeply, she's wonderful, but there was a girl that I think, had I ever married anyone of the relationships that I had, it would have been her. I call her my Spanish flower. And her name is Christina. And just before I left, we had an incredible relationship. I met her working at a restaurant. She had, I don't know, fairly recently come to Canada, beautiful Spanish accent, the whole bit. And we had a fantastic connection, and where previous to her, I'd been in like the longest relationship I'd ever been in. And coming out of it for a couple of years, I didn't know what to think of relationships anymore. And she kind of taught me not only to come to terms with myself, but also to come to terms with women generally, to have a broader perspective of what they were like and what they were capable of. And I'm so glad to have met her. She's a real banner bearer for the rest of her gender. Let me tell you, Christina is amazing. And it came to pass that we were together for a year. And it was this kind of bittersweet thing in the relationship where I met her around the time that I was coming to Japan, or planning on coming to Japan. And so you might have called it a doomed relationship. That's what you might have said. But having it doomed from the start in this strange, all things can be good or all things can be bad, depending on the perspective you bring to them, it was actually good because it relieved a lot of pressure, where so many relationships, I think, suffer from our desire to classify them so clearly. What are we? How far along are we? Are we following the set steps that we ourselves have imposed but are rigidly holding to? Liberated from that and the fact that we knew it was likely to come to an end, we could be with each other and not have it be for any other reason than we enjoyed each other's company and who each other were. And I will admit, also another example of her being a wonderful person, when it came time to be that mature adult, around the time that I knew I would be very soon going to Japan, I thought, I'll be mature and I'll break it off. And afterwards, I found myself, in the aftermath of that breaking it off with her, I felt resentful of her still not showing me affection for the choice that I had made. Which is incredibly immature. It's the inverse of everything that I thought I was trying to accomplish at the time. But the truly astounding thing that she did was never to lose her patience with me, and at one point confronted me and asked, like, why are you behaving so ridiculously? I'm acting as I am, less affectionately, because it'll allow us. First of all, you ended it. You were the one who said, okay, it's time for this now, which is right. It's true. I did do that. And then secondly, her behavior to like kind of cool things off would then make it so much easier to go on to that next stage of our lives. Not meaning at all that we didn't love each other, but that white hot intimacy had to cool down. And she was absolutely right. And I, having accepted that and still caring for each other and realizing that it was all for the better, and she was basically doing what I had asked her to do, I was so impressed by that. It kind of created the standard for, I know how people who really care about each other can really treat each other, because it would have been very easy. And in fact, I think I was leaning into this idea of maybe if we dislike each other, it'll be easier. It's a common pitfall to relationships, where I think people will often stay in them knowing that they're done, it's over, and you should be out of them, but will stay because it's easier to forget someone that you hate, and so stay once the relationship has gone off the rails, and then now I really hate this person, they're intolerable, and this break will be so clean because I can't stand the sight of them, the smell of them. Everything is horrible, everything is awful. But we didn't end up like that, and so I knew, this is kind of giving some background, hey, for the hell of it, for like what I respect in people in relationships. And I came over to Japan, and I knew that was a girl, like even the way in which we stopped seeing each other, that this was a person I could tell just how she behaved with such respect for the relationship that retained it too. I mean, that's what saved it really in the end. Was that I was like, okay, I can own this. I get it. It's a good point. You've given a good example here. I cooled things off and I came to Japan. And since that time, like I said in the post that I made today on Instagram, it's not that the opportunity hasn't presented itself to me. It's that I've kind of willingly gone in another direction, and that feels really good. To add some more satisfaction to that story, I don't think Christina would mind me saying even now, once I came here for a couple of years, perhaps, 1 year or two, she was still in Vancouver. She'd worked to get her permanent residency in Canada. And I went back, and we had stayed in touch because we salvaged the relationship and wrote to each other on occasion. And then I went back, and summers, this is, like I said, how I'm so certain that life on earth can and is heaven at times, where I went back during the summer, and it was perfect, idyllic, pristine weather, this balance of hot and cold that you find in Vancouver at that time of year. And she came to meet me at the airport. And when I walked through the terminal and finally went through customs and everything like that, and then arrived into the welcoming area where it was all these muted tones of kind of like gray and green, very kind of calm Canadian colors. Right in the middle, bright as the sun, in this glorious red dress with like yellow and orange on it, was Christina waiting for me. And talk about a homecoming. Memories to keep you warm at night kind of thing. It was so incredible. But to move on with this idea that as long as you're defining your experience abroad or defining your experience in general on terms that you care about, then you'll go wrong, because I think going wrong is inevitable, but I think you'll be at peace with whatever does go wrong. Where I think Jim Carrey has like a fantastic phrase. He's like on one of these YouTube videos where he talks about seeing that his dad always tried to follow the straight and narrow and then failed. And he was like, well, if you're going to fail at anything, why not fail at what you love doing? And I think that's truly wise. Now, you have different cultures around the world. I had somebody from, I think it was Pakistan, who was like, it's kind of tough shit, Dave. Over here in my country, it's mandatory still, and you have to get married. So I was like, all right, given your circumstances, I just hope that goes okay for you. And another thing that stuck out to me is that I'm 35, and I felt this way. And I had both kinds of people tuning in on either end of the spectrum. You had people who were like 26, and they were like, oh man, I get you. I know how you feel. Men and women. And then you had people who were older than myself who were like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not middle age at all. And it's added to a thought that I often have about perspective and also shared experience, that I really do think often about how this outer shell kind of belies what is behind it. How we always feel somewhat lost, somewhat always ourselves, even if, as I say, as the wake fades off behind the ship, you don't realize that. You always just feel like yourself. You notice change. I was saying you notice change, you accumulate experience. I've got like 12 batteries. They're dying quickly. I've been doing a lot of recording. But ever and always, you feel like the same person. When I speak to my mom, she's like 69 years old, 67, still feels like the girl that was growing up through the 70s, that kind of thing, 60s and all that. My dad, the same way. My dad lives hard. I respect him for that. He's never stopped. And yeah, I think it's a lesson in compassion for yourself and compassion for others, and also to kind of put in perspective as well, to never put something on a pedestal, because when you look at somebody, outwardly put somebody on a pedestal, respect should always ever be earned, because just because somebody has this outer appearance, it doesn't mean anything. Somebody might look prestigious. Somebody may be, well, beauty is beauty. There's no denying that. But this outer shell is not so much ever who we are, but it's such a potent thing, because that's, of course, what we're in first contact with. But what I took from all of it is that we are all essentially, nearly in every moment, earlier, later, having the same thoughts. And if I could gather in what was worth integrating with what I already believe, it's that you can kind of let it go, that this sort of thing, all these experiences matter in a sense that they all have value and they all have drawbacks. It's this constant thing I talk about, how life is contrasts. When I think about that person who is at home with their kids and all they can think about is maybe getting a weekend or a date night with their significant other, and they never get a chance to do that, and they look out, at their neighbor next door who is single and partying it up, and they're quite jealous of their experience of life. But then at the same time, like I talked about yesterday, they're raising this potentially incredible, depending on how you've raised your child, incredible kid, which is really, really cool. And perhaps the thing to constantly remind yourself of is the experience that you're having it's exceptional. It's really, really amazing. And to not waste your time, pursuing a perceived thing that everybody else is telling you to do, and that what you're doing is enough. That's cool. Like, however you're occupying your time, if you can do it with passion and with interest, and responsibly to whatever responsibilities that you have in your life, then there's nothing wrong with your path. Now, I would say that by extension, this goes on, I was thinking about this as well, that it goes on to marriage. Because again, especially like different countries, like I was saying, perhaps Pakistan or whatever I was written from there in the comments, that there's different sort of standards of when you should be married. I mean, kids and marriage can often go hand in hand, but they don't have to necessarily. I could just as easily be somebody who was married and didn't have any kids. And that was something else that I found in the comments, or people like that, where they said, we thought when we were going to get married that we would have kids afterwards, but for the direction that we were pulled in our lives, that never happened for us, and there's nothing wrong with it. So again, no matter what permutation of this what strand is it that you're following along, nothing wrong with that, and always worth extending a little bit of kindness to somebody who feels like they may have failed because they're not following whatever thread that they thought they would be on. It seems to me the only error that you can make is to, if you're taking care of your shit, if your life's in order, the only problem really is if you don't give yourself a break for kind of meeting that basic standard. And then once you're paying your bills, you're looking after the people you care about, who cares exactly how it goes? Have a goal, but don't berate yourself for not having achieved it yet. That kind of thing. Now, I wanted to spend a little bit more time, kind of what I was discussing earlier, talking about how important it is to take stock because of this wake fading out behind your ship. And I guess that's, like I said, kind of where it originated from, is I was like, I'm starting to really forget some of the details of when I was younger and why I might be doing all of this. And I think it's important because it made me realize that while those things fade and they're useful as a point of reference, as I said, we can be guided by our history. It also reminded me that really creating a direction for yourself, although it's informed by whatever came before, it can come from that moment of reflection, that moment where you take stock of how things are for you in this current age, this current month, day, year, minute, whatever it is. And that is enough. Maybe you're going to make better decisions. Some people might even make worse looking back. But the important thing to do is to take stock, make some notes, write out some sort of journal if you want to. But in doing so, you're going to align yourself. And I think these little sessions that we give ourselves where we can create purpose are so good because I've talked dozens, hundreds of times about, I really do think that humans kind of like fundamentally to our sanity, we are purpose driven, especially the more intelligent and self-aware that you become, because it becomes a sort of existential hell where you become increasingly aware that you can do incredible things, and the more I would say that you're suited to do that and you don't, the more that you torment yourself. And so these sessions that we set aside meditatively to write down are really, really important. And I think they're especially important in the way that we have so much feedback around us now. We have so many inputs as well that come to us that distract us from that moment. Like, for example, I like to think of myself as a fairly determined person in that I've got goals, I write them down, I want to accomplish things, I carry through as much as I possibly can, but I am constantly falling away from those goals without the strictest of discipline. I realize that for a person who likes to think of themselves as like a disciplined person, for the most part, I'm not. It's incredible how easily I am distracted. Say, for example, I've got a new book and I want to read it. And I do. I have a new book and I want to read it. That's no lie. If I lie down in my bed, and I've got this brand new sexy phone next to me with unlimited data or whatever else, then if I don't make a concerted effort to put down the phone and pick up the book, because of how seductive and addictive and enjoyable, novel, infinite screen spin is, I can waste a million hours in that way, and let alone the sort of individual things that we want to do that might distract us away from reading a book. We can get so caught up in these indulgences. Say you're on Facebook, say you're on Instagram, say you're on Reddit, whatever it is, that there's so many of them. And I mean, obviously you have one of them directly attached to your leg and person at all times nearly, that it's so easy to never, ever plan, to never, ever reflect. And I think that spins us out in a way, because where I say that purposes are happiness so often is derived from purpose, we indulge and we indulge and we indulge, and inevitably we become burnt out on these things. You do. I think even as much as they're like a pleasurable addiction to go scanning through all of these, there comes a point where like the shame wizard shows up and we can't continue it anymore. And then if we've done nothing, this dip that will then follow whatever this burnout point that you get in your indulgence is going to be horrendous. And I think that once that happens, well, then you kind of you want to push that dopamine button again. So you go on Reddit or you do whatever else it is that's immediately gratifying to you, but you're getting diminishing returns. You press it harder, you go harder, you find some dumber and dumber thing, whatever, you scratch for every last piece of novelty that keeps you going until you burn out again. And I would beseech, entreat implore anybody who listens to this to definitely take stock of that for yourself. I say this as much to you as to myself when I talk about it, because in fact, that's almost like half of my creative efforts are to remind myself to do creative things, to stay out of these ruts, to stay positive, to not, when I reach like whatever point of indulgent burnout, that I don't have something where I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. I feel comfortable so far with what I've been doing in the last month or so because I've done these other things, and it provides peace for all the other indulgences that I've had. I will say, though, getting a brand new phone, it was almost about 4 years. I think the woman at the store said when we checked the time that I'd had my phone for about 3 years and 8 months. So when I got the new phone, I tell you, that snappy new processor, the high refresh rate, 120 hertz screen, oh, it's buttery. It's thrice the addictiveness of before, and I really love it. I'm a tech nerd, so these kind of things, they really do it for me, which has meant my resolve has had to be doubled and tripled again to make sure that I don't just spend 30 hours a day on my phone. It's really tempting too, like working on the different like social stuff and creative stuff that I do, to end up there forever, and that's no way to spend a life. So those are some reflections on just about like marriage. I thought it was so interesting, all the different opinions and experiences that I got from everyone when I made that post today about this point in my life and not yet being married and having kids, but also to be so lifted up by everybody else's. It really seemed to strike a nerve. Everybody was like, I'm gonna offer up my own thoughts at this from every range of the age spectrum and everything else. But having said that, now let's move into some more podcast questions, and I'll repeat again here in the podcast that if you want to get these answered, of course, write to me at davetrippin@gmail.com, and it's very likely that you will get your questions answered in the podcast here. Or wherever else you can get a hold of me. I mean, that's a great way because I can categorize them. But then, of course, on Instagram, I'm available as well, and I can move questions around. But let's jump in. So this is from Glenn. I didn't see this. Is from Scotland. How cool is this? My heritage. Going one more little rant here. I think this would be so cool. So again, talking to a friend the other night, a friend I made recently who's from Norway. My background history is Scottish and Norwegian. That's my background. Perhaps one other thing in there. The traditional Caucasian mutt. But something that happens in Canada, being a Caucasian, mixed Caucasian, is that you don't really have... I mean, I'm Canadian and that's cool. And there's elements of that society that I think are wonderful, new culture kind of stuff. But as much as the history of the planet is steeped in violence and barbarism and treating people horribly, there's a lot of beautiful aspects to cultures around the world. And if you have any sort of connection to them, it's nice to know your history. And I was talking to this guy from Norway, this new friend that I've made, and he was showing me all this incredible hiking that he does, this thing called like the Trolltunga. It's like the tongue of the troll in Norway. I've never heard of before. This is, again, why I love meeting and interacting with all of you to learn about the world, which I am largely blind to. And I got this idea that where I like to say when I do this full time, once I built up my Patreon, mostly my Patreon because my channel is a smaller channel, that I would do this full time. I would dedicate to saving from that to do a trip to Norway, because like it is one of the most beautiful photogenic places in the world, and it would be this reconnecting with my roots. It would be to meet this friend that I've made. We're kind of like pen pals, but he was the one recommended recently this book I've read, The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which is incredible. But to go over there, I got another friend who has Norwegian roots, and we were thinking of, or I had put forth the idea that we would do it together. Drew, actually, who I mention in all these videos. Yeah, I thought that would be the coolest thing. And now to see somebody writing me from Scotland, well, that's fucking sick. That's so cool. Other parts of my roots here. So this is funny. He says, Glenn says this is a lengthy question. It's not, Glenn. This is actually you. I'm sure if you watch the podcast, you know how long these can get. And I don't like to put a limit on them, on their length anyways. So I've been looking at the ALT route for a while as a pathway to living abroad. The biggest worry in my mind is not the independence or communication, but rather the teaching experience itself. I struggle to enjoy public speaking and don't believe I have the personality type to be an effective teacher, despite what I've heard about the simplicity of the ALT position. I'm about to graduate with a master's in English literature, but have no teaching experience or qualification. I am planning to do a short TEFL certificate after I graduate to get a sense of whether teaching is something I can enjoy. Are you aware of any potential paths I could look into, or are these anxieties normal and likely to be overcome? Absolutely they are. I have no problem repeating this idea that we die 1,000 deaths, one of which will actually kill us. It's always, the anxiety is always larger in our head, and I don't think that it ever goes away. I think that it simply becomes manageable. That's it. It becomes manageable because you want to know something, Glenn? I am anxious when I go into every single class. Maybe some people get rid of that entirely. In fact, I'm certain there are. I'm certain people that have this kind of like rhythm and way about them that they can go into a class, and when they do, it doesn't stress them at all. They're not anxious. Now, the reason that I say it can be controlled is because that anxiety for myself usually dissipates within, I would say, 5 minutes of the class, 5 to 10 minutes. It's a sort of like whenever you step out in front of a group of people to present, to teach, whatever else it is, there's just an edge to that. And what I try and turn it into, where we're calling it here kind of like anxiety, struggle to do public speaking, I like to think it's a thrill. I think as well that I find it so thrilling to go in front of people that I mean, we know this old adage of like the things most difficult to overcome are the most satisfying. I think this is one of the most difficult things in the world to overcome for us, is public speaking, to stand in front of a crowd and not feel stupid, and to feel like what we say has worth and that we can command the attention of the audience that we're in front of. And so I would embrace it. I would usually say, I've talked about this before, this will be a kind of repetition of something I've said in the past, but most assuredly, the answer to this when you have this issue is to go, if you want to solve it, if you don't want to throw the towel in, is to go towards the anxiety. The worst thing that you can do in these cases when you do feel anxious is to repress it and retreat. Because if you repress and retreat, then what will happen is you're conditioning yourself to a sort of like fear Pavlovian response. You're going to now, at the mere thought of going out there, because you fled from it last time, you're going to feel even more fearful, and you're going to condition in yourself a stronger sense of anxiety, and what could have become a thrill for you will truly become dreadful. And the reason I would be most optimistic is because I've seen anyone and everyone, essentially, that is to say, all personality types, overcome this. I think someone, aside from having an acute psychological disorder, would be able to overcome this anxiety, and it's not special. It's. I hate to burst anybody's bubble who thinks it's unique to be intimidated by public speaking. This is a shared human trait. It's within 99% of the population that people are going to be like this. And so I would say, since it's so common, so is the cure, like I'm describing. You go out and you do it. I think like you hear comedians talk about this a lot as well, where once you fail, this is a great example of failure being useful. Once you bomb in front of a large group of people and you realize, like what was it, Dave Chappelle was talking about it, and I can't remember, it was a talk show host or something. He was like, do you know what happens when you bomb in front of 800 people or several thousand people? They asked the host, and the host says, I don't know. What happens? He says, nothing. Nothing happens. And if you make yourself go out there and experience that bomb, that failure, maybe 1 or 2 times, then you realize there was no saber-toothed tiger at the entrance of the cave. It's a bunch of kids. It's a bunch of students. And so what, you bomb, then you've hit rock bottom. It's sturdy. You jump off on it. It can come out right. You jump off it and you get back up. I've really focused here on the actual act of like going out and looking this kind of thing in the face, because also what is true here is that there is simplicity to the position in so many of the roles that you'll find here. So for example, like stressing, I could say, like a lot of people, their inclination would be to tell you that actually you're never going to be put in a stressful situation because there's so little responsibility that you have. The classes are so small. Don't even worry about it. But where I find that's not the right way to approach this is because people aren't afraid of the reality. People are afraid of what's in their head. And so if you reassure them about the reality of there's very little stress, you'll have very little responsibility, that doesn't ring true with the why you irrationally fear this. And that's why I say, don't try and rationalize away this anxiety. More look into the abyss, see all that anxiety waiting for you, and leap into it. And kind of trial by fire, once you pass through it, once you move through the illusion, that's the only way out to the other side, because the only way to dispel the illusion is to move past it. You can't look at it and think your way out of it. So that's what I would have to say about that. And I can guarantee you, this is another thing I can guarantee you, unless you have an acute psychological disorder, which don't convince yourself you have one of those, I'm sure you don't, that you're always surprised. People are always surprised when they get to the other end of it. I'm always surprised as soon as I finish another class or another session. I'm like, what? That was actually downright enjoyable. That was really, really cool. Why was I freaking out the whole time about this? That was so silly on my part. Why did I do that? And I feel, Glenn, that you would do the same. So good luck to you. Don't lose heart and throw yourself into the deep end. Okay, this is from Annie. I checked out some of your YouTube and wanted to ask a few questions about teaching. This is English in the countryside. My fiance and I are graduating university this May, congratulations, and plan to travel to Japan to teach English post-graduation. I know you said that direct hire as an ALT is probably the best option if you don't have teaching experience, but a start date in April isn't ideal for us. We're thinking more like July or August since we graduate in May. I was wondering if you had any suggestions for good ESL jobs in the countryside that hire more year-round, would have openings in the summertime. Information online about schools in the countryside is hard to come by, so I figured I'd reach out. I appreciate it. Yeah, so perhaps I misspoke because I'm accumulating I'm accumulating experience and knowledge and better perspective on what it is that makes for a good job if you want to do teaching out here. And so I would say, first of all, that I've spoke too soon to say that direct hire positions are the only one. There are a lot of private schools and private eikaiwas that can be good roles for you. You can get into these and you can do very, very well. Okay, so here's how I build your situation up, Annie, is that when you first come, if you are considering being here for more than a year or so, like I will repeat ad infinitum, first of all, tons of jobs are going to be available in the window that you're speaking about because there's turnover all the time. People are coming and going. You could look on gaijinpot.com. You can look on Ohio Sensei. That's really good. Not so much jolt.org. I think it's .org because those are more once you have actually accumulated experience. So let's say Ohio Sensei and Gaijinpot. When you're looking on there, you're going to find positions. Now, step 2, anybody who watches the podcast or knows my channel knows what I'm going to say is that it's a stepping stone. So you basically get in this kind of like rough time when there are these eikaiwas that will get you in and probably be paying you some shit salary of like 230,000 yen a month or something, but there's 2 of you, shared income, you're fine, probably really shitty healthcare, all that kind of thing. But who cares? Because you get in with them, you accumulate experience of over, say, a year, I would say even a half a year. No, like, even if it's to move into sort of a similar position, but just simply that you get paid a lot more money, say from 230, they bump you up to like 280 or something like that, to look elsewhere. Always, to get your foot in the door, do not be so concerned with exactly the job that you find. And maybe I've spoke too much. You've listened so far and said, oh yeah, I could have inferred that so far, but I wanted to build up this scenario for you. So first of all, no problem. You'll find work, find it through those different ways that I suggested. Step 2, work there for a very minimal period of time and look immediately as you've gotten a lay of the land for other positions which are better. Don't hesitate to apply. Once you have your work visa, there's nothing that's binding unless you have a draconian contract, which is that's the one thing I would caution against. Read your contracts for draconian measures put in place for if you break contract. I've never seen it before, but I have never experienced it before, but I do know people who have had draconian contracts that are saying, we're going to fine you or something if you move on, which is utter bullshit, and you don't have to put up with that. And you can easily find better positions than that if you look. And then find something better. Then once you have a bit more experience, direct hire, private school, international school, something like that, you'll have no problem. Okay, so I didn't put that down. Okay, next one. This is from Mona. Okay, hi Dave. I thought I would reach out, given your experience in Japan, being an ALT. My name is Mona. I've watched your videos as I was in the beginning stages of deciding to pursue applying as an ALT, and now that I'm in the midst of it, would just love to get your thoughts and opinion on. I'd also like to mention that the programs that I applied to JET, Altia, Eon, specifically Altia because you mentioned it, as one of the best programs you could get into aside from JET. Eon didn't go through. Although my Altia may seem promising, I'm beginning to have doubts, especially with my effort I continue to make to meet their expectations. Although to be an ALT does not require having a past teaching experience, speaking Japanese, time in Japan, it's like any experience whatsoever. This is true. They've made it prime for me to meet these areas despite knowing that I do not have much experience in any. Okay, I'm forming an idea here. I don't mean to go on about it, but as I continue to work on my Japanese and improve, I also question whether they're just entertaining me to be nice to consider me as a candidate. I think they'll act in their own self-interest. That's not anything new. Also, in a way that I don't fault some of these companies, they want to project professionalism, and it seems that Altia, the more I talk to people, they do have like a higher standard, and I think it's fine so far as they don't kind of like superficially push them, where it's like, yes, we have this high standard, but they should realize when the sky is not falling and somebody's genuinely doing their best job. Now, the way that you have to parse this is that each different Altia is responsible for like whatever group of areas, and not all Altia employees are made equal. And so your experience with one, for example, say the recruiter, you may have an experience with them, but then you're never going to hear from this person for like the rest of your contract once you arrive. So really think about when you're considering your choices and where they're formed from. Will these affect you in the long term? Is it related to something that you're going through at the moment? How much is that going to change once you're already here? So it's fine to don't be discouraged at first blush. Always examine again, take some time away. Like, I've really come to see how in time, more and more, when I'm in a new experience, I need time to really analyze what I've been through. Once again, my battery died. Things are crazy here, but I'm charging as I record to be able to finish this today. What I was talking about for myself when I'm taking in new information, especially when it's stressful times, like you're making a big decision right now about your job, your work. What you need is time to digest that information. You need a moment to step back and say, is it because I'm so stressed that I'm making the decisions that I am, or that I'm going to pull out of this opportunity prematurely? Or is it really that there's something here that I should be concerned about and I really do need to pull the plug? So take a big breath. As my mom said, take a big breath, count to 10, breathe out, and then make your decision going forward, because it sucks to throw away an opportunity simply because we got a bit of cold feet and we kind of like you had like all of a sudden buyer's remorse and you have to return it, you have to throw the thing back, or you had to buy the thing, you had to have the thing. The worst decisions are usually the ones that are rushed. So take your time and I think you'll be good. All right, cool. So next one here, this is from Phantom. Okay, hope you're doing great. I am. These days I'm doing pretty good. Thank you very much. I got a few questions about teaching English. Sure you do. You're not disturbing me. I hope I'm not disturbing you. You're not. I watched your video about not worrying if you're not an English native speaker, which was 3 years ago. Does that still apply for 2020? Rules, or now are they more strict? Plus, will they become more strict in the future? I'm an English literature student and I'm going to get my BA soon, and I'm going to have a TEFL certification online in 2021 since I can't do it in my country. And now I'm going to apply for teaching in Japan in 2022 or a maximum 2024, some time from now. If I choose to teach in my country for 3 years as an experience to add to my files while applying, well, that would be very good. Can you suggest any good sites or companies that may accept me? Also, any advice from your experience would be grateful. Let's see. Also, here's a weird question. My name is Muhammad. I'm not a Muslim, but my name is Islamic. That always worries me since forever, because Muslims are not accepted anywhere, and that would be a problem in my case. Changing my name and all the papers would take too long and also would disappoint my parents. Yeah, I don't want to disappoint them. Yeah, I completely understand that, Muhammad. You don't want to disappoint them, and your name is a series of letters that form a sound, and that sound is not you. So I understand how frustrating that can be. I don't think you would need to worry. I mean, I'm in a place now where they really, really respect and appreciate internationalism, particularly like international English speakers. Now, you have a little bit of more of a challenge ahead of you, of course, because the idea in the Japanese speaker's mind, in a Japanese English educational institution, is that native speaker equals person who's going to teach the best, which is not always true. I mean, you take, for example, I was saying this guy that I'm talking to recently from Norway, like the books that he's recommending me to read and the books that I've recommended him to read, like English is like his second or third language or something. And he speaks better English than most people I know, like in all honesty. So it's not always that you are a native that matters. Now, it would bar you from the public school system. That's important to note. So the public school system requires that you would be a native speaker or have 12 years English experience in an English institution. So like you were raised through an English speaking school or something like that. Now that I've cleared that up. There are other tracts which you could proceed down. For example, like in the private sector, I've mentioned through Eikaiwas, the private English schools that you could teach at. So with, like you've described, that you would have a TESOL, that you would have teaching experience in your own country, I think that there exists for you a very good chance that you would be able to find something. And once you are here, and you got your foot in the door, as I'm so fond of saying, that will be the epitaph on my grave, get your foot in the door, I think you could do fine for yourself. I won't paint it all with one brush, though, and say that it's so easy. It is going to take an additional effort, but I think you could do it. I think you could. All right, that's that one. So now, let's see. Okay, this is another question. It's from Brian. I think we actually answered Brian's question in the last podcast, but why not? Brian is supporting me on Patreon, so you can ask any questions. Anyone can. Why not a couple? I've heard a lot about differences in the size of buildings and clothing in Japan. I'm 6 feet tall, and you seem like a tall fellow yourself. Could you expand on your experiences buying clothes, shoes, and so on in Japan, and the doorways? Well, I would say the older that the buildings are, kind of like you would find it anywhere in the world, like particularly Europe. You notice if you go to like old structural places that the buildings are smaller. So if you go to old structural places in Japan, the buildings are smaller. Like, for example, when I visit Drew in Kyoto and we stay at his machiya, for the most part, I'm ducking and weaving and keeping my head down, and so it doesn't get knocked off. But there are times that it does. I'm so glad I haven't bit my tongue off yet in the machiya. But for the most part, in modern structures, it's not going to be an issue for you. I wouldn't worry about it at all. As for clothes, there are certain stores, if you're like over 6 foot, that are kind of a no-go for you. For example, like there's the suit store that I wanted to go to and try out. Like they have suits, but they have like other clothing as well. It's called like Takakyu, but that's a no-go for me. But that said, if you go looking around, if you go to Uniqlo, Uniqlo has all sorts of like Western sizes in it, and it's like an international brand, and they have a lot of these international brands that you can find. And then if you need to go suit shopping, I've gone to suit shopping places, and I've got like a new suit recently, and they measure you up, and it's no problem at all. I would say the biggest problem that I have and will have for time eternal, well, here in Japan, but perhaps then you can simply order online, are shoes. Shoes are the great equalizer for people with big feet or biggish feet. Finding shoes here in Japan can be a right pain in the ace, because they just won't have the shoes. Like they don't manufacture them up to this certain size. If you go to a store, they're like, this is the cutoff. It's not, we're sold out. It's that we will never carry that size of shoe. So yeah, there are some size differences, but nothing ever that's prohibitive. Like you're never going to find an alternative option. So it ends up equaling out in the end. Okay. So this is from Ryan. Says, okay, the original email got corrupted, but now we're back in business. I watched one of your videos about what degree is best to teach in Japan, and I've decided that I'm going to teach in Japan for 1 year and then come back to America to go to grad school for international relations, Asian studies. Cool, interesting. I have interviews with Interact and Altia in a few days, and I have a question if you might be able to answer. Okay. In order for me to go to grad school, I need recommendation letters. So I was hoping I could get one after my time teaching in Japan. In your experience, do you think I could get a recommendation letter from either the dispatch company or the school I end up working at? I know you talk about how Interact doesn't have great support for ALTs, so this concerns me. If it turns out I can get a recommendation letter, then teaching in Japan will be out of question for me. I think that you absolutely could. I say this because when I worked at a junior high school, it was my ambition at one point I was going to go all in with the teaching thing. And so I was going to apply for a distance master's degree in linguistics from the University of Calgary. And for that, I needed reference letters. There was one professor I met here through YouTube, fantastic guy, Dan, and he was willing to write me a reference letter. So that was kind of like, wow, that was lucky. But then the other guy his name is Yoshida Sensei, and he's one of the coolest teachers I've ever met here. And I taught with him, assisted him for a year because he was baller. This is one of the best teachers I've ever seen. And he agreed to write me a reference letter. So if you forge good bonds, if you have good relationships with the people at the school, then I see no reason that you couldn't. You could even go like so fancy as to get your Kocho sensei, who would give you a reference letter for your degree. And how fancy would that look? Because there's this kind of funny thing in Japanese schools, which it shows how cool Yoshida sensei was, that he extended this kindness for me. So if you ask for a reference letter, it's like it's supposed to be from the Kocho sensei. And if you ask an individual in the staff room, can you write me a reference letter? Often they'll say, oh, well, it's not my place, and that should be referred upwards to the man or lady in charge at the school. But it proved to me that that's something that can be transcended if your relationships are good enough, because Yoshida sensei was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it for you. And the way that we did it is we sat down, and his English was great. He's an English teacher, but he had me edit the reference that he wrote for me. So I was like, this is pretty cool. I can have it sound however I want, and he was content with that. But as I say, I don't think it would be a disservice to you to have the Kocho sensei, the principal of the school, do that reference for you. And if you did a good job, you can almost certainly guarantee that you would be able to get that. So I am confident in telling you that if you do a good job, that you will absolutely be able to get letters of recommendation and continue to pursue your dream of graduate studies, which is awesome. Good on you. That's really good to do. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast. I thought it was kind of cool. Start with that sort of philosophical bent to begin with on marriage and children. That was a fun rabbit hole to go down. And then there were some really good questions. To plug a final time, davetrippin@gmail.com. If you'd like to have your questions answered, hit me up there. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please do hit that like button. Please do subscribe, bell notification, do the whole thing if you want to be let known whenever content goes up on the channel. Moment's notice, as soon as it does. If you would consider supporting me on Patreon, it means the world to me. Small channel like mine, that's how I continue to grow and develop all the good times that we're having here. So that's all for now. The clock has run out, and I will catch you guys in the next video.